How do you feel about Washington and Oregon playing in the Big Ten Conference? Seeing Ohio State or Michigan State or even Rutgers and Northwestern taking the field in Eugene or Seattle. How does that make you feel? I know that USC and UCLA coming to the conference already was something new, and it's something that we're not going to be able to fully process until USC and UCLA play Big Ten teams in 2024. But now Oregon and Washington are likely going to be Big Ten conference members, future conference members, within the next 24 hours. Per reports from Pete Thamel, Brett McMurphy, and several other news networks and channels, the Big Ten is expected to move ahead with formal offers for Oregon and Washington, and per Pete Thamel specifically, the Big Ten vote is expected to take place later today to formalize their admission, barring any last-minute snags. I talked about this a few days ago that it was my opinion that Oregon and Washington would be Big Ten members by the 2024 season. The Pac-12's proposed TV deal from Commissioner George Kalaikov is just pathetic. The pay-per-view, pay-per-subscription scheme, just with how the Pac-12 has struggled in viewership and has had poor performance over the past several seasons. That whole deal tying the Pac-12 media rights at the hip with Apple TV just wasn't a good idea, and apparently that was just a proposal. They never moved forward with negotiating or signing that contract, which still was an example of the Pac-12 kicking the can down the hill once again. And now, with Oregon and Washington, 99.9% it's likely that they're going to be leaving the Pac-12 as soon as tonight. The conference is dead. And I said that a few days ago, but now I think saying that the Pac-12 is dead is just a formality. I do think this will be the last season where the Pac-12 functions as just as a conference, not even a Power 5 conference, but as a standing conference. This will be the last season that it functions. It's fracturing apart right now, and everyone's reporting on it. The Athletic, Yahoo Sports, Sports Illustrated, ESPN, and CBS Sports. We're going to be reading articles from those latter two by David Cobb and Pete Thamel today. But tell me what your thoughts are down in the comment section below. I mean, what do you think about an 18-team Power 5 league? When the SEC, when they added Texas and Oklahoma back in, like, before the 2022-2021 season, and it was announced that they would be joining the SEC no later than 2025, that turned a lot of people's stomachs, and a lot of people looked to the Big Ten and said they have to respond. I myself said that, and there was speculation that the Big Ten might go after Kansas, potentially Iowa State, or some other Big 12 schools, because it looks like the Big 12 was going to fall apart. Well, Brett Yormark pulled that ship together. The Big 12's no longer sinking. At worst, they're treading water. At best, they're going to expand and potentially become a super conference of their own, because the remaining 7 teams now in the Pac-12, they're going to need a new home. Maybe in the future, the Big Ten will pick up like Stanford, California, maybe even Utah, but it's looking more likely now that Utah, along with Arizona and Arizona State, will move to the Big 12, bringing that league to an official 16 teams beginning in 2024. So the Pac-12 at this point is just a collection of rump universities who have no home, and they're looking for a home. And the Big 10 got the 2 remaining biggest brands in Washington, who's a top 25 program all time, and Oregon, who is a top 10 program over the past decade. So great move by Commissioner Tony Petitti from the Big Ten. Great move by him. All in all, I'm impressed. As a Big Ten fan, I can't exactly say that I'm the biggest fan of this, but I can't control anything. I'm just a guy looking at a computer screen, talking through a microphone, who's a Michigan fan, who has an affinity for all things Big Ten. Yes, that includes Michigan State and Ohio State, the rivals of my schools. And with the direction that college football is going, and since I can't change anything, I just have to sit back, embrace the change. Granted, as long as the change isn't anything wrong or something that I object to personally, but it isn't. So, looking at all of this, I can say that it's a great move. I'm excited to play Oregon and Washington. I'm excited for them to participate as members of the Big Ten Conference, and they are going to bring more revenue to the conference as a whole, more security. The conference will become even more competitive because Oregon, for example, beat Ohio State in their own house in 2021. Washington would have kicked Michigan's butt in 2020, and Washington beat Michigan State ferociously in 2022, and they're going to face off against Michigan State in what I think will be a great game in 2023. So Washington, Oregon, and we know USC under Lincoln Riley is going to explode as a program. UCLA under Chip Kelly's been growing. The Big Ten is adding not just teams that bring in TV revenue from TV markets. Eugene, Oregon, and especially Seattle, Washington are sizable TV markets that will rack in extra revenue and make the Big Ten truly a coast-to-coast conference, because just having USC and UCLA, really, that doesn't make you a true coast-to-coast conference. That just, you're a Midwest conference with an outpost on the Pacific coast. But now with Oregon, Washington, I think the Big Ten is a true coast-to-coast conference. And going back to my original point that I almost strayed away from, they're adding quality football teams. Teams that can, if they can recruit at a high enough level, have coaching stability, potentially compete for Big Ten championships and national championships. USC, we know that whether it's Pete Carroll, John McKay, or other coaches whose names that I don't know, or Lincoln Riley right now, these are coaches that have won national titles, competed for national titles, certainly won conference titles, and competed at a high level. And Oregon, whether it was Chip Kelly, whether it was Mark Helfrich before he ran everything into the ground, Mario Cristobal won conference titles with Oregon, and Dan Lanning, I think, is a phenomenal coach, and he's locked down his position as Oregon's head coach for the next several seasons. Washington won a national title under Don James, and Chris Peterson brought them to the college football playoff. He also brought Boise State tremendous success. So the Big Ten is securing its future, both in terms of revenue, income, but also quality football, and I'm a very big fan of that. I want to talk about Oregon and Washington specifically, what they are as a program, my outlook for them in the short term and the long term, though the long term, of course, is mostly speculation. And then I want to talk about what some of the immediate and long-term ramifications are for the Big Ten Conference as a whole. Before we continue into this video, comment your thoughts on the Big Ten's expansion down below. Do you think they're going to stop at 18 teams, or do you think they're going to try and hit that 20-team range as quickly as they can by maybe going after Notre Dame? And if Notre Dame accepts, maybe they go after a Stanford to pair with Notre Dame? Or do you think they're going to stay at 18 teams? And what are your personal feelings about this? Do you like the direction that this sport's going in, or do you not? Any answer is acceptable. There isn't a right or wrong answer. Comment your thoughts on all of this down below. Hit the subscribe button so you can be a part of this awesome college football community. We just hit 10,000 subs, and we're going to hit 20,000 hopefully soon. And make sure to hit the notification bell so you can get notified when I publish more college football and Big Ten football content. And please watch the video all the way through and share it around with other college football fans. But first and foremost, I want to talk about the Washington Huskies. Washington, they're in the Seattle market, which according to the Nielsen TV rankings from last year is the 14th largest market. So the Big Ten going out and adding a top 15 TV market, very important. That's going to bring in a lot of new viewers. Washington's fan base, when Washington is doing well, is sizable. The team is a top 25 program all time, and you can see that in the fact that they've won over 60% of their games. They've won 2 national championships, 17 conference championships. Over the past 10 years, they've also been a top 25 program, winning 82 games, 2 Pac-12 titles, even making a college football playoff appearance where they competed with Alabama for the whole game. It's too bad that Alabama just had far more talent. They had generational talent, and Washington's defense was stout, but thanks to a run by Bo Scarborough and just several turnovers by Washington's offense, they couldn't succeed. That Washington offense, in fact, was coordinated by Jonathan Smith, which should let you know why the Huskies reached the college football playoff that year. And then when he left, things really began to take a nosedive for Chris Peterson and the Huskies. The state of Washington has had rich high school talent over the past few seasons. If you're a Big Ten fan, Emeka Egbuka, who is going to be an All-American caliber wide receiver at Ohio State and was a 5-star coming out of high school, and JT Tuimoloau. JT Tuimoloau also came from the state of Washington, 5-star at a high school. He has All-American potential this season, but we'll see if he can play at the level that he did against Penn State last year with some consistency and not just with that up-down kind of motion that we saw from him last year. But those two players came from the state of Washington. Those two players alone. 2 5-stars in the same class. And that's just one example. Sam Howard is another example. He now is at Cal Poly as a quarterback, but he committed to Washington as a 5-star. And, I mean, look, the state has just had tons of talent over the past few seasons. I don't exactly know if Howard came out of the state of Washington, but I know he committed to Washington. I know Washington's consistently recruited inside of the top 50 and definitely higher than that over the past few seasons. They have a few 4-stars in the 2023 class as well. So the state is talent rich. It's not like Texas. It's not like the Southeast. It's not even probably like the state of Virginia. Definitely not like California. But Washington does have some talent in state. So that'll help the Big Ten. And as we've seen before, Ohio State has obviously had their hand in the state of Washington recruiting. Washington currently has a head coach in Kalen DeBoer who's a proven winner at the lower levels, and in his few seasons at the FBS level, he's went 3-3 and 9-3 at Fresno State, and in year 1 in Washington, he went 11-2, losing to Arizona State and UCLA, but beating Oregon, beating Texas, and beating Oregon State. He beat several high-quality opponents, also drumming Michigan State when they were inside of the top 15 in the 3rd game of the year for both programs. So Washington is a great head coach. They have one of the better strength and conditioning staffs in the country, in my opinion. Entering 2023, I have them reaching the college football playoff. They have amazing wide receivers in Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, Roma Dunze, and then they have a great quarterback, an elite quarterback, college level, in Michael Penix Jr. And Washington as a whole, I think they're going to have a great year. They have an underrated set of players as well, all around. It's not just about the quarterback or the wide receivers, but it's also about the offensive line. It's about an underrated tight end in Jack Westover, and at running back, Cameron Davis had over 10 rushing touchdowns last season. Dylan Johnson, incoming transfer from Mississippi State, he had some limited success there. On the offensive line, their tackle room, their guards, their center with Mateo Mille as the projected starting center. Their offensive line will be one of the best in the country, and they have a collection of NFL pass rushers in Braylon Trice and Zion Tupulala Fatui. Hopefully I got that name right, but those are defensive ends who are projected to be NFL draft picks in 2024. And they got a nice corner in Jabbar Muhammad, who really is a great player, transferred in from Oklahoma State. So Washington in the short term should be one of college football's best teams in 2023. If they continue to recruit at a good level, Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb, they're offensive masterminds, and if they continue to use the portal selectively to get better players on defense and offense, they have their wide receivers coach who came from Purdue. I forget his name, but he developed players like Rondale Moore, David Bell, and look, if he stays there for a long time too, they're going to have great wide receivers. So this team offensively in the long run, they're going to field probably a top 20, top 15, maybe top 10 offense in college football almost every year, as long as that staff is kept together for the most part, but especially if Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer stay with the Huskies. And this team, I think I like them. They're top 25 all time, and they have a great head coach. And defensively, last year, they improved throughout the year. And I think this year, with some of the additions on the transfer portal and the fact that they have top 25 returning production, I think this defense will be a top 25 defense in college football. Maybe not statistically, but through the eye test, through watching them play in big games and watching how they play situationally, I think they'll be a top 25 defense in college football. So great short-term future. Obviously, the long-term is speculation for the most part, as it will be with Oregon and any program, because we don't know what the future holds. We cannot predict the future, but in the long term, it looks like Washington has a great future as well. And I would say it's the same with Oregon. But when you're in the Big Ten Conference, or you're going to be a future member of the Big Ten, and same with the SEC, I'd say your long-term future is great. If you're in the remnant of the Pac-12 or the ACC, your future is potentially terrifying. At best, it's questionable. In the Big 12, it's kind of that sweet spot, I would say, where at worst the future's questionable. At best, I'd say the future is good. I think that Deion Sanders will win multiple Big 12 titles in the long run, and I think that TCU, potentially even Kansas, and definitely Kansas State will be good programs as well. Maybe Iowa State and Oklahoma State, they do better, and because Oklahoma and Texas are out of the league, maybe they recruit better as well and win more games at the conference level. For Oregon, they're in the Eugene TV market, which is rated much lower than the Seattle TV market. But Oregon's addition, I'd say, is less about a TV market and less about their past history and more about what they've done and what they've been in the present. Because over the past 10 years, they've been a top 10 program, I would argue. Only one losing season over the past 10 years, only one. And that was in 2016 when Mark Helfrich, Brady Hoke, and Matt Lubick just ran the Titanic into the iceberg. With poor recruiting at quarterback and poor coaching all around, that team was just doomed to fail. And after 1 year of Willie Taggart, they hired Mario Cristobal, and Cristobal did a good job at Oregon, but he wanted to eventually coach at his alma mater in Miami, and I think they upgraded at coach from Mario Cristobal to Dan Lanning. But that's just past half a decade history, or maybe past 6 or 7 years history, because 2016 is now 7 years behind us. But going back to the end of the Chip Kelly era and the beginning of the Mark Helfrich era, this team was dominant. They ran over Florida State in the college football playoff semifinal, the first Rose Bowl to host a college football playoff semifinal. They competed with Ohio State for 2 to 3 quarters in a national championship game. Marcus Mariota won the Heisman not even a decade ago. And this team's won 13 conference championships. 3 of them have been in the past 10 years. Over half of them have been in the past 15 years. Wins over the past 10 years, they've had 89, and they've only won 57% of their games. So what Oregon has done in the past 10 years is nothing short of phenomenal. Whether they've been innovative on the offensive side of the football, even defensively. People don't remember this, but under Chip Kelly, they consistently fielded top 10 defenses. The lack of defense stereotype that's associated with Oregon not only was reinforced after last year, but it was a theme under Mark Helfrich. The defense immediately fell off starting in 2013. The 2014 team actually had a defense that was mediocre. It was barely inside the top 40 in multiple categories, but the offense was so legendary with several fast players and Marcus Mariota at quarterback. But Oregon also has a tradition of being sound and fundamental on all sides of the football and taking players who are 3 stars and 4 stars and developing them into something greater, because they don't even have the in-state talent that Washington does. For example, they have to recruit outside of their state, inside of their state, get whatever they can, and develop those players into something better. And recently, they've been recruiting inside the top 10, and they have a nationwide brand name and an awesome deal with Nike and a sponsorship with them. So this program is a very high-ceiling program, lots of potential, a ton of investment. They've been very close to winning a national championship, and Dan Lanning's won a national title as an assistant coach. as a defensive coordinator with Georgia. He, in fact, was the biggest reason they won a national championship under Kirby Smart in 2021. Him, along with Todd Monken, got that whole process started with Georgia. Without those two coaches, I don't know if Kirby Smart would have won a national title with Georgia. And that's not disrespect to Kirby Smart. It's the same thing with Nick Saban at Alabama. Who knows, without Kirby Smart as his defensive coordinator, if he kept Kevin Steele around from his first 2007 season, it might have taken him longer to win a national championship. As a great head coach will always hire great and elite assistants. That's what makes Nick Saban great. That's what makes Kirby Smart great. And that's why I still view Ryan Day with respect, because he's hired great assistant coaches. And that's why Jim Harbaugh was able to turn the ship around at Michigan and win in the Big Ten and compete for national championships because he upgraded his staff. Oregon has a great staff. They brought in Will Stein as offensive coordinator from UTSA, where he helped develop Frank Harris into a top 20 college football quarterback. And they have Tosh Lupoy as their defensive coordinator. And Oregon all around is set for a great year in the short term. I began talking about the long term, which I think their long-term outlook is probably brighter than Washington's. In the short term, though, Trayshawn Holden, Troy Franklin, Tez Johnson at wide receiver. Bo Nix will be a Heisman caliber player this year at quarterback. They have an elite running back room with Bucky Irving and Noah Whittington. At center, they're going to be starting Jackson Powers Johnson and Josh Cornerly Jr. and Johnny Cornelius should be one of the nation's best tackle duos. Like Washington, they have a good defensive end room. Jordan Birch and Brandon Dorless should be one of the Pac-12's better pass rush units. Defensive tackle might be a slight concern. Definitely the same with secondary, as they'll be starting all incoming transfers or true freshmen after losing a few NFL draft picks from that position. But offensively, they'll be one of the best teams in the country. So for both of the former Pac-12, now I'm 99% sure, Big Ten schools, the future is bright. But what does this mean for the Big Ten? Well, first and foremost, the Big Ten will change their 2024 schedules to accommodate the Ducks and the Huskies. There's no doubt about that. The Big Ten is going to want these two schools to join as soon as possible. ASAP. That's why right now they're, holding a vote. They're trying to get this done as soon as possible because the Pac-12 right now is sliding into the ocean. It's not that the foundation is cracking and the Pac-12 has a chance to repair it. They're already falling into the ocean. It's just a matter of time until they crash into the ocean and sink to the depths of the sea. It's only a matter of time. We're watching it happen right now. We are. Per Pete Thamel, again, Oregon and Washington, they're finalizing a deal to join the Big Ten, and sources are telling everyone, and they're expected to apply formally, for a membership today, and the Big Ten is expected to vote this evening, and the vote's expected to be unanimous, despite initially some reports that higher-profile Big Ten schools were questioning whether they wanted expansion. The finances aren't clear, but both Oregon and Washington will only receive a partial share of the conference allotment through the length of its TV deal, so similar to what Rutgers and Maryland received for joining the Big Ten, for example. And then according to CBS's David Cobb, I'm going to link that longer article down below, but basically the Pac-12 is likely going to fall apart. The Apple Rights media package presented this week is just, it's ineffective. I've said these things earlier in the video, but I just want to reiterate it because the Pac-12 is not surviving. And if you're a fan of the Pac-12, I just want to say that it stinks. It absolutely stinks. If my conference was falling apart like this, even if Michigan football were to survive, to a certain degree, it would not be the same. And it would take time to adjust, but it's very clear the Pac-12 is done. I think Washington and Oregon will be each other's only protected rivals in the Big Ten play. It'll be it. It'll be like USC and UCLA, which I like. They are already a rivalry. It's been a very intense rivalry, actually, one that Oregon has dominated for the past 2 decades. Washington beat them in 2022, and they beat them, I think, in 2015, in 2000, not 15, but 16 and 17. Oregon, even in recent memory, whether it's 2019 or 2021 or 2018, even under Mario Cristobal and some of his teams that were non-Pac-12 championship caliber, were able to beat the Washington Huskies. So that's a rivalry, one that Washington looks to right the ship in regard to that rivalry, similarly to how Michigan has with Ohio State. So that's good. It's one of college football's more underrated rivalries. There are two top 25 programs in college football right now, for sure. So I love that addition, and I love that rivalry, but there will be other rivalries that will suffer from this. And this is where for me even it's sad. The Apple Cup and Civil War, I think, will die after this year. I hope, especially for Civil War, because I think Oregon State is a program, looking at how they've recruited, they got a very underrated pickup at quarterback, a 4-star who's a true dual threat. I think the future of the program. And Jonathan Smith is a genius. Their defensive coordinator, Tim Tibesar, is a rising star. And I'm looking at Oregon State, and that's a good team. It's a good program. They just finished not reservations, but renovations, pardon me, on their stadium. And I don't want that rivalry to die. Last year, it was an intense game. It was back and forth. Oregon blew a huge lead. There's going to be a huge revenge angle to 2023 Civil War, but Civil War's been one-sided. Same with the Apple Cup, in favor of Washington and in favor of Oregon, respectively. And I don't know if they'll survive, straight up. Bedlam isn't surviving. It's very unlikely that Bedlam's going to be an annual rivalry anymore, and I think it's going to be the same with Apple Cup and Civil War, unfortunately. So that will be a consequence that I personally am not a fan of. Very much not a fan of that whatsoever. Because rivalries are part of what make the sport great, and I know that we're moving into a new era where new rivalries are taking shape. An old one, thankfully, is being restored in the Lone Star Showdown with Texas and Texas A&M. But with Oregon State especially, I'm telling you, Aiden Childs, that 4-star commit, he's the future of the program. And Oregon State as a whole, with Jonathan Smith, this season, they have the potential to reach the college football playoff. I'm not even kidding you. They have a chance to do what TCU did last year, except people are actually ranking Oregon State inside of the top. They're ranking them inside the top 25 or top 20, but realistically, few, if any, are projecting them to go to the playoff. They have an easy schedule. Their toughest opponent, I'd say, is going to be Washington or Utah at home. Oregon's their only tough road matchup. Their other road matchups are going to be San Jose State, Washington State, California, Arizona, and Colorado. That's it. And I think that, again, Trent Bray is actually their defensive coordinator, pardon me. Brian Lindegren, their offensive coordinator. They have a great staff. Tibesar was their old defensive coordinator who was fired in the 2021 season. So pardon me on that error. Some other predictions that I have are because of the television rights negotiations, the Big Ten will stop expanding in the short run. I don't see Notre Dame joining a conference within the next few seasons, though eventually, perhaps a few decades down the line, they'll be forced to. But maybe I'm wrong and they continue to be an exception to the rule. But I don't see any other teams joining. Because for Oregon and Washington, they know long-term, even with them just getting partial revenues from the Big Ten's television deal, they know that this will be a great move for their schools. Oregon State is not an AAU school. Neither is Washington State. Utah is. California and Stanford are. But Utah will likely look to the Big 12 as they fit that four corners geography. And that rivalry with Colorado, I'm telling you, that's going to explode with Deion Sanders being there. And Utah is peaking as a program right now. California and Stanford would make sense because of AAU status, but Stanford's fallen off big time. David Shaw just retired, and California has been a doormat of a program for about the past decade. So I don't know if the Big Ten's going to want to pick them up unless they get a big name like Notre Dame and or Utah to pair with it, who also fit the American Association of Universities footprint that the Big Ten desires. I think the SEC, in response to this, will quietly entertain expansion to potentially add Clemson or Florida State or Miami. I know Miami got AAU status, which some indicated as a signal that they would prefer to join the Big Ten, but they make more sense in the SEC. They do. Their fan base and some other things about them don't whatsoever. Their academics, for example, their fan base isn't passionate. Those things don't fit well with the SEC, but geographically, they do fit better with the SEC. And if Cristobal does, climb that program and take it up with him, up the ladder, they could eventually fit and the U could be back. So I think the SEC, even though Greg Sankey's saying they're content with 16 teams and they're working to build that conference up, they will try and entertain Florida State or Clemson. They'll at least try. Doesn't mean they'll be successful, or maybe if Clemson and Florida State reciprocate interest, that they'll accept them, but they'll try. I know that the SEC, even now that they're smaller than the Big Ten and have a smaller footprint, with how they've dominated college football and the fact that they still own the most talent-rich areas in the country, it wouldn't surprise me if, despite the fact they have less revenue and they're smaller, that they still continue to dominate the sport with their recruiting and reputation. But maybe that will change. In the short term, I don't know, but I think that in the long term, the Big Ten will turn out to be college football's best conference because they were in the right place at the right time. For one, like, this is an example of that with Washington and Oregon. They've been open to expansion, somewhat open, and then Washington and Oregon want to leave the Pac-12. The Big Ten accepts them, but they were also smart in the beginning. They went out and they poached USC and UCLA, and they went on the offensive there. Here, there were reciprocating feelings, right place, right time, wanted a business deal, and they got it done. So the Big Ten is successful on all fronts, and if this goes through, and I'm 99.9% sure, then the Big Ten has a new commissioner, and a real commissioner. Tony Petitti, what he's doing right now with the Big Ten, if this goes through, all the praise to him. So thank you very much for watching this video on Big Ten expansion. I'm excited to have Oregon and Washington play in the prestigious Big Ten Conference, which now has 18 teams and, in the near future, counting. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment your thoughts down below. If you're listening on Spotify, please make sure to follow the channel. We just broke 100 followers. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye-bye.